At 2 in the morning, I woke up to cold sheets and the empty space beside me. The air in our Pittsburgh bedroom felt sharp, like the AC had kicked on just to punish me. I reached across the mattress and hit nothing but wrinkled cotton. My name is Damon Grant. I lived in Pittsburgh. I was 43 then, back in late July, still dumb enough to think a quiet marriage was a strong one. Blythe was a paralegal at a divorce firm, the kind of woman who could say, "I'm just trying to help," and somehow make you feel like you'd failed a test. I ran a small branding agency out of a renovated floor in an old brick building downtown. We weren't flashy, but we were comfortable. The paid-off condo I'd bought before the marriage, savings, and a business I'd built from nothing. I figured she was in the bathroom. I lay there listening for the toilet flush, the faucet, any normal sound. Instead, I heard her in the hallway, speaking so quietly I had to lean toward the doorway to catch it, too deliberate to be casual. I slid out of bed barefoot and moved slow, one hand on the door frame. That was when I caught it, plain and unmistakable. He doesn't suspect anything yet. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might gag. I froze, staring at the dark wall like it could explain it. Her next words turned to mush, muffled by distance in whatever room she'd angled toward. But I could still hear that smile in her voice. She sounded calm. She sounded practiced. Footsteps padded back toward the bedroom. I didn't have time to be brave. I climbed in fast, pulled the blanket up, and forced my breathing into that slow, sleepy rhythm. I stared at the ceiling, counting beats like it was a job. Blythe slipped under the covers as if the hallway call had never happened. Her skin was cool against my arm. She smelled like peppermint, the gum she always chewed when she wanted to seem relaxed. I kept my eyes shut. After a minute, I asked, "Where were you?" "In the bathroom," she said without missing a beat. "That long?" "It was a quick call," she added, as if that should have settled it. "Go back to sleep." I wanted to sit up and drag the truth out of her right there. I wanted to say her sentence back to her and watch her face crack, but I swallowed it. I'd built a business by not lunging at every threat. If I reacted too fast, I'd give her control of whatever came next. So I stayed still, let her think I was harmless, and reached under my pillow for my phone, setting an alarm for before dawn. The alarm on my phone glowed under the pillow like a little secret, and I kept my hand wrapped around it until my knuckles ached. Blythe's breathing stayed smooth beside me, like she'd done nothing wrong in her life, and I forced myself to lie there without moving. When the alarm finally buzzed, I killed it fast and slid out of bed like I was late for work, not late to my own life. I went straight to the kitchen with my phone in my hand and the coffee still untouched, because my stomach had no interest in comfort. The condo was quiet except for the fridge hum and the soft click of my bare feet on tile. I sat at the table where we'd eaten 100 calm dinners, and I opened our banking app with the kind of focus I usually saved for a client pitch. I hadn't checked our transactions in years because I trusted the setup, and now that trust felt like a joke I'd been telling myself. We had a joint account for bills and then separate accounts for personal spending, the arrangement that kept peace in the house. Looking at it that morning, I realized the point of peace wasn't love, it was silence. The joint account history loaded, and I saw a pattern that didn't belong. $430 here, $980 there, $1,260 a week later, then another normal-looking bite out of the balance. Each one was small enough that I could have missed it on a busy week, but steady enough that it screamed plan. What hit me hardest was where it came from. It wasn't my agency operating money or some separate stash. It was the household account we used for the life we pretended we shared. The withdrawals had vague labels that looked automated at first glance, the kind of thing you'd assume was a utility or insurance payment. But none of it matched our condo fees, our services, or any vendor I recognized. I was staring at the screen when Blythe walked in, her hair loose and her face fresh like she'd slept great. I locked my phone without thinking, but she still paused in the doorway, and that half-second pause told me my face had given me away. She poured herself water and watched me over the rim of the glass, calm as ever. I tested her with one clean line. "I looked at the joint account this morning and I saw some things I don't recognize." Her eyes didn't widen, but her mouth tightened for a split second before she put on a shrug that was almost lazy. "It's small investments and short-term moves," she said, like she was reciting something she'd practiced. And then she let out a little laugh that tried to make me feel stupid for caring. What she couldn't fake was the strain around her eyes. For weeks, she'd been watching the mail too closely, once even snatching a thick envelope off the counter before I could see the return address, and checking balances like a person waiting for bad news to arrive with a stamp. I let that one pass because arguing would have handed her the moment. Later that afternoon, she floated a new idea like she was being helpful, all bright tone and neat logic. "We should make an emergency binder," she said, "with passwords, assets, account lists, everything in one place." Blythe had never cared about my logins or my business interests before, and hearing her suddenly want it organized didn't feel like planning. It felt like harvesting. That night, she left her phone on the coffee table while she showered, which she almost never did, and the screen lit up with a notification from a name I didn't recognize: Vance Marlowe. I didn't unlock anything because I didn't need to, and the preview line hit me hard enough that I had to set the phone down. "Don't let him see it yet. We're close." The message read like instructions, not affection, but all I could feel in that moment was betrayal. I set her phone back down exactly where it had been, square on the table. I sat there with her phone exactly where she'd left it and kept my hands in my lap because I didn't trust them not to shake. The shower kept running, steady and loud, like it was trying to wash the truth down the drain, and I stared at the blank television screen until my eyes felt dry. When Blythe came back out, she moved around the living room like nothing had happened, and I let her have that comfort without giving her a single clue. The next morning she came in cheerful, humming while she cracked eggs and buttered toast, and the smell of bacon filled the kitchen like an attempt to make the morning feel normal. She asked if I wanted my coffee the usual way, and she said my name with this soft warmth that didn't match what I'd been hearing at night. That sweetness felt staged, like she was stepping into a part she knew would sell. I sat at the table with my mug between my hands and watched her smile at me across the counter. She brought over a folder, gray and neat, and slid it across the table like it was a menu. "Can you sign these?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Tax, housekeeping, boring stuff, and then we're done with it." Her fingers tapped a fast rhythm on the folder, and that nervous motion told me more than her face did. I opened it and flipped through, pretending I was scanning like I always did, calm and businesslike. The language was dense, heavy and sharp around the edges, and it didn't read like taxes at all. Then I hit the page that mattered, and the room seemed to narrow. It was a transfer agreement, laid out clean and confident, moving my condo, my savings, and my agency shares into her control, with the kind of wording you used when you expected compliance. I kept my expression neutral and spoke slowly, because panic would have been the sound she wanted. "What is this supposed to be?" I asked, giving her a chance to back up without losing pride. Blythe smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and that dead space in her stare made my skin prickle. "It's just consolidation for protection," she said, like she was explaining something simple to a child. "You've always said you hate messy paperwork, so I'm cleaning it up for us." "I'm not signing anything I haven't reviewed with counsel," I told her, steady enough that my own voice surprised me. Her smile twitched, quick and ugly, and the kitchen went still. She leaned forward and lowered her voice the way she did when she wanted to steer me without sounding like she was steering. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she said, slow and sharp. I answered in the same measured cadence because any drama in that kitchen would have given her exactly what she wanted. I slid the folder back neatly, lined up the corners like I was handling a contract, and nodded once. "I'll think about it," I said, and then I stood up and took my mug to the sink like the conversation was over. That afternoon I called Briar Knox, a mediator and crisis strategist with a reputation for containing messy disputes, whom I knew through a past client, and I didn't dress it up. I told her my wife worked divorce cases. I told her paperwork had shown up in my kitchen, and I told her I thought something was moving behind my back. Briar didn't gasp or soothe me, and that alone made me trust her more. "Don't confront a person who's already in motion," she said. "People like that do their worst work quietly, so you get a lawyer before you say another word at home." I called Maren Halpern next, a family attorney with a corporate background, and I kept my tone tight and factual. When I mentioned Blythe was a divorce paralegal, Maren didn't sound shocked. She sounded irritated, like she'd seen this exact game too many times. "Send me statements, deeds, ownership documents, and a clear timeline," she said, calm and clipped. Then she added, even calmer, "If she's moving early, you move earlier, and we do it clean, legal, and fast." I hung up, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and pulled every document she'd just tried to take from me until my eyes burned. I downloaded statements, dug up the condo paperwork, and pulled my agency ownership files like I was auditing my own life. Every time I heard Blythe's footsteps in the hallway, I clicked to something boring, then went right back to it when the sound faded. 2 days later, I sat across from Maren Halpern in her office, and she didn't waste a second trying to be nice. She had a legal pad, a hard stare, and that calm voice that said she'd seen people get wiped out for being polite. "Your wife's folder wasn't planning," she said. "It was a setup, and she expected you to sign it like a sleepy man signing a receipt. We built a plan that didn't depend on my feelings because my feelings were the weakest tool I had. Maren recommended a trust structure and a protective operating agreement amendment for my agency shares, and she wanted it done before any filing showed up. She tapped her pen and said, 'Courts respect clean math, not panic, so we keep this boring and correct.' That's exactly what I did. I moved key assets the legal way, with proper documentation, dates that made sense, and explanations a judge could read without rolling their eyes. I transferred $186,000 from a personal savings account into a properly drafted trust, and I signed the paperwork with my hands steady. The condo title and my agency equity got protective language that made a grab and run impossible, and every step had a paper trail so clean it almost felt insulting. One detail stayed branded into my brain while we worked, and it was an account opening date. It had been the week after my dad's funeral, when I used part of a small inheritance to stabilize my business and keep payroll from slipping. Maren made me write that date down twice. Then she made me write it again next to every related transfer. "Timelines win cases," she kept saying, and I nodded like a student because I finally understood what she meant. Back at home, I put on an acting job like it was my second career. I acted tired, acted unsure, and let Blythe see me scrolling the news like my mind was somewhere else. She started helping more, bringing it up in that sweet voice that always carried a hook. "Do you want me to talk to someone about streamlining finances?" she asked. "I could handle the paperwork so you don't have to carry it all." I told her, "I appreciate it, but I've got it," and I kept my tone dull on purpose. She didn't push right then, but I could feel her watching me the way you watch a door you plan to walk through. At the office, Keely Sutter knocked on my door with her laptop hugged to her chest, and her face had that tight look she got when something didn't add up. "Damon, there's a consultant invoice in the system that doesn't match any project code," she said, and she turned the screen toward me. The name on it was Marlowe Advisory, clean and official looking, like it belonged. "I didn't hire anyone named Marlowe," I said, and my voice came out colder than I meant. Keely clicked into the email chain and showed me a forwarded message that looked like it was written by me, but the wording wasn't mine at all. "It came through approvals like normal," she added, "and that's what scares me, because it's wearing your skin." I leaned back and kept my face flat. "Lock down approvals and forward everything to me, no exceptions," I told her. When she hesitated, I kept it simple. "We've got a bad actor sniffing around, and I'm not letting them touch payroll or clients." That night, Blythe tried again, casual like she was asking for the weather. She wanted my passwords, then she pushed further and said she should be listed as a backup for my two-factor authentication, so we're protected. I looked right at her and said, "I'm working on an organized list, and any security changes go through my agency's IT vendor." Her eyes flickered with impatience before the warm smile snapped back on, and I opened my laptop to email my IT vendor anyway. I kept the email short, a full security review and a lock on approvals that touched money. Then I shut my laptop, looked over at Blythe like I was just another tired husband trying to be responsible, and let her keep believing that act. Over the next week, I kept playing dumb at home and sharp at work, and it took more energy than running my whole agency. Blythe stayed sweet in that controlled way, offering help and pretending my caution was just stress. I didn't give her a fight, because a fight would have told her she was landing punches. Then, one morning, there was a knock at my condo door that didn't sound like a neighbor. It was sharp and measured, like someone tapping out a code they'd used 1,000 times. I opened the door and found a guy in a navy blazer holding an envelope, posture straight and eyes empty like he was delivering cable bills. "Are you Damon Grant?" he asked, flat and professional. "Yes, that's me," I said, and my voice came out steady even though my chest tightened. "I'm Gavin Rusk," he said, and he held the envelope out like it weighed nothing. "You've been served." He didn't care what my face did, and he didn't wait for questions. I took the envelope, shut the door, and stood there in my entryway with the paper cutting into my palm. Blythe was already at work, which told me everything I needed to know about how she wanted this to land. She controlled the scene by not being in it, and she left me alone with the blast on purpose. I opened the packet at my kitchen counter and read it like it was a hostile contract. The petition was aggressive, and it didn't even pretend to be fair. She wanted half of everything, claimed I'd controlled finances, and asked for spousal support like I'd been living off her, which was laughable and still ugly. The language didn't sound like a hurt wife. It sounded like a strategy memo. I called Maren the second my eyes hit the last page, and she told me to bring it in. In her office, she read the papers without blinking once. Then she flipped to my trust filings like she was showing me a map. She thought she was early, Maren said, tapping the page with her pen. She was late, and she's about to learn what dates do to a story. That was the first time I exhaled in days, and even that breath tasted like metal. That evening, Blythe came home furious, but she didn't start with yelling. She paced around the living room, poured herself water like she was calming down, and then she looked at me like I'd committed some personal crime. "What did you do?" she asked, sharp and controlled, like she already knew but wanted to hear me say it. "I protected what I built," I said, giving her nothing else to work with. I wasn't going to sign myself into a box. Her face went cold instead of loud, and that switch was what scared me most. "You're going to regret making me look stupid," she said, and she leaned on that word like it was the real wound. She didn't say she felt hurt, and she didn't say she felt betrayed, because those weren't the emotions running her. She walked away after that and left her glass on the counter like a threat she didn't need to explain. 2 days later, the second attack showed up where I couldn't ignore it, and it reached my agency before I could contain it. People gave me sideways looks, conversations stopped when I walked in, and the air felt thin even though nothing had happened out loud. Keely came into my office and shut the door behind her, and her voice dropped low like she didn't trust the walls. "I heard something spreading through the local ad scene," she said, eyes tight with anger. "They're saying you're laundering money through client retainers and moving funds to dodge taxes." It was surgical, not random gossip, and I could hear the careful wording even through Keely's paraphrase. The timing was brutal because we were in final talks for Ridgway Brewing's full rebrand, the kind of contract that kept payroll stable when the market got weird. Keely swallowed once, then hit me with the part that mattered most. "Ridgway's chief financial officer got an anonymous email warning them about your financial instability," she said, and she watched my face hard. "Their coordinator tipped me off because they felt bad, and they thought you should know." I picked up my desk phone and told Keely, "Get me Ridgway's chief financial officer on the line right now." Keely moved fast, and I watched her fingers move with the kind of care people use when every second matters. When the call connected, I didn't waste time trying to charm anyone because charm doesn't beat panic in a boardroom. I got straight to the point. "This is Damon Grant," I said. "I heard there's an anonymous email floating around, and I want a chance to address your concerns directly." The CFO stayed polite, but his tone had that corporate distance that meant he'd already been warned not to say too much. "We're reviewing some information internally," he replied. "There will be a board discussion before any final decision, and I can't get ahead of that." "Then put me on the agenda for 10 minutes, I said. "If you want counsel present, I'll bring mine, and I'll keep it factual." He didn't promise anything, but he didn't hang up either, and that was a small win. After the call, I shut my door and called Maren because I could feel the pressure closing in. Maren sent a cease and desist to Blythe's attorney, and it didn't slow anything down. Within days, Blythe filed a motion demanding a forensic audit of my finances and a freeze on certain accounts, like she was trying to slap a padlock on my life. Maren didn't sugarcoat it. "This isn't about winning," she said over the phone. "It's about cost and exhaustion because she's trying to starve you out." I finally told Keely the truth after that, because keeping her in the dark was starting to feel like setting her up as the fall guy. I sat her down in my office and spoke plainly. "My wife is coming after my assets and my reputation," I said. "If you see anything weird, you tell me immediately, because they're fishing for an angle." Keely went pale, and I could tell she'd realized something before I even finished saying it. "I'm the easiest person to frame," she said, and the way her jaw tightened made me respect her even more. She pulled up a message she'd gotten on LinkedIn from a burner account, the kind with no real history and a generic photo. It asked for internal ledgers and vendor lists, written in that fake friendly tone that tries to sound like a normal professional request. I didn't answer, she said, but the fact it exists means someone targeted me. I nodded once, and my anger stayed inside my ribs where it belonged. Briar Knox helped me draft a simple internal statement for the agency, and she made me keep it clean and boring. No gossip, no speculation. Client work continues, and any outside inquiries go through counsel, because panic language was gasoline. When I read it out loud to Keely, she breathed a little easier, and then she sent it to the team like a firewall. That same day I called my mom, Lenore Grant, because I needed one voice that wasn't legal strategy or workplace triage. She didn't coddle me, and she didn't ask for details like it was entertainment. Handle it clean, she said. Then come eat, because you still have to be a human being. Around that time, the coincidences started stacking up like someone was pushing dominoes. A bank rep called about unusual inquiries and acted like it was routine, but her voice had that careful edge that meant somebody had been sniffing around my accounts. A landlord contact asked if my office lease was stable, and I could hear the hesitation like he'd been primed to expect trouble. A client asked if my partner should be worried, even though I didn't have a business partner, and that told me the rumor wasn't wandering, it was being steered. I wasn't present for Blythe's backroom conversations, but Discovery started giving us crumbs. Marin read me parts of emails that came through legal requests, and my skin crawled at how clinical they sounded. There were references to Marlowe's plan, paper trail, and pressure points, like my marriage had been turned into a project file. That's when Vance Marlowe stopped being a random name on a phone notification and became a person in my head, an asset protection consultant who talked like a gentleman but lived in the gray. What hit me later was that the tone had been there from the start. Vance wasn't her lover, and there was nothing romantic in the language at all. He was directing the operation, and Blythe was following a script. Ridgway scheduled a board meeting to decide whether to pause the contract, and at first I wasn't even invited. I emailed back anyway and asked for 10 minutes on the agenda, adding that I'd bring counsel if they preferred it that way. Then I hit send before I could second-guess myself. By the end of the day, their coordinator replied with a short note. I had my 10 minutes. The night before the first hearing, nearly 3 weeks after I was served, Blythe left me a voicemail that sounded almost sweet, like she was offering a deal instead of a threat. "We can make this easy," she said. "Just sign what you should have signed." I saved the message, forwarded it to Marin, and set my phone down like it was evidence. The morning of that first hearing, I walked into the courthouse feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's business dispute, not my own marriage falling apart. The hallway smelled like old paper and burned coffee, and every sound echoed off tile like the building wanted you to feel small. Marin met me by the courtroom doors with a stack of binders and a look that said she'd already done the math. Inside, the audit hearing felt less like divorce court and more like a business ambush, and I hated how comfortable Blythe looked in that setting. She showed up polished and quiet, hair perfect, posture straight, sitting behind her attorney like she was watching a project timeline instead of trying to freeze my life. She didn't glance at me the way a normal person would, and that blank focus was the first clue this wasn't emotional for her. Marin was matter-of-fact, which made her the strongest person in the room. She walked the judge through dates, filings, income history, and the simple fact that my moves happened before Blythe served me anything. Blythe's attorney kept using phrases like concealing assets and suspicious transfers, and I could hear the strategy under the words because it wasn't about facts. They were trying to make me sound shady to strangers, because strangers don't know me, and suspicion is cheap. When Marin spoke, she stayed calm and stripped the drama out of every point. "These were documented protections," she said, flipping pages like she was reading a manual. "There is no cause for a forensic audit, and the timeline does not support the accusation." The judge listened, asked a couple pointed questions, then looked down at the paperwork like he was tired of theatrics. He denied the forensic audit for lack of cause, and ordered Blythe responsible for the legal fees tied to the motion. And the room shifted in a way you could almost feel in your teeth. I didn't celebrate because celebrating felt stupid, but my shoulders unlocked like someone had finally loosened a belt. Outside the courtroom, Blythe walked past me like I was furniture. She didn't say a word, and her face carried that calm anger that told me she was already planning the next hit. Marin leaned in just enough for me to hear her. "She's not done," she said. "But now she has to explain herself with documents, not vibes." That afternoon, I got a call from Ridgway's chief financial officer, and I took it standing in my office with the door shut. His tone stayed careful, but it wasn't hostile anymore, which mattered. "The board still has concerns," he said, "but we appreciated you showing up in person and not trying to bully us with trust me language." "I'm in a divorce," I told him plain and direct. "My wife is making claims, my attorney is handling it, and I have documentation showing those claims are baseless." I didn't give him a victim speech, and I didn't ask for sympathy, because business people hear that as weakness. Later, Keely told me Ridgway's marketing lead had noticed something useful. She stood by my desk and kept her voice low, as if even repeating it out loud gave it more power. "They said the anonymous warning email used phrases that sounded like your wife," Keely told me. "It read like a paralegal writing for non-lawyers, and that's not proof, but it's a tell." Marin introduced me to Orrin Pike right after that, and he got right to the point, which was exactly what I needed. He shook my hand, sat down, and didn't waste time with comfort. "I want everything," he said. "Statements, timestamps, account opening documents, vendor records, and even your agency email headers." Then he added, flat and confident, "Forgery falls apart in routine records." That evening, Breyer forwarded me a message from one of my industry acquaintances, and the words made my jaw tighten. Blythe had invited 2 people I knew to dinner at Wexler & Company, and she'd casually mentioned I was under investigation, like she was planning a story over appetizers. I didn't rush over and I didn't confront her, because that would have been the reaction she could twist. I called Marin and said, "They're planning the next story," and she answered without hesitation, "Good, because anything planted leaves records, and records can be traced." I hung up, pulled a box of records from my credenza, and stacked documents for Orrin until my desk looked like a small paper wall. I labeled folders with a black marker so there was no room for confusion. The office lights felt too bright, and the air smelled like toner and stale coffee. But I stayed locked in because the records, unlike people, held still. Keely hovered near the door like she wanted to help without getting in the way, and I nodded at her once to let her know I saw her. The next escalation didn't come through court first, and it didn't come through a rumor either. My bank called, and the woman on the line sounded careful in that trained way that means someone has already warned her not to say the wrong thing. "Mr. Grant, your business line of credit has been placed under temporary review," she said, and I could hear the discomfort in the pause that followed. "What does that even mean in plain English?" I asked, keeping my voice level even though my pulse jumped. "I'm not able to discuss details," she replied, then lowered her tone like she felt bad. "We received documentation." That was banker language for someone trying to turn my life into a compliance problem, and I could feel the trap snapping shut around time and money. I told her, "Have your compliance team contact my attorney, because you're not going to get dragged into someone else's divorce games." And I hung up before my anger started leaking into my words. Marin moved faster than I expected, and that's why I'd hired her. She got us a copy of the packet through legal channels, and she brought it into her office like it was a dirty object she didn't want on her desk. The packet was thick, formatted to look official, and it accused me of routing client funds to personal accounts with a straight face. It included fabricated statements, fake transfer logs, and a tidy summary that used just enough correct terms to fool someone who didn't live in numbers. Orrin sat beside Marin's desk and went page by page without any visible reaction. He stayed expressionless, and that calm almost made me more nervous. Then he stopped on one page, leaned closer, and tapped the paper with his fingertip. "This is the crack," he said, and the way he said it made my stomach tighten. He slid 2 pages side by side and pointed at dates like he was pinning bugs. "This forged packet references 2 accounts," he said, "and it lists transactions that happened weeks before those accounts were even opened." He looked up at me once, not for comfort, but for confirmation. That's what happens when somebody builds a fake timeline backward and forgets that bank records keep their own calendar. I didn't have to think about it because one of those account opening dates was burned into my memory. It was tied to my dad's death and the week after his funeral, when I used part of a small inheritance to stabilize my business and keep my agency from slipping. I swallowed hard and said, "I remember that date because I could still see the form in my head, and I signed those papers when I could barely stand up straight." He kept the same clinical tone. He pulled official opening documentation, then matched it against the forgery timestamps with the kind of precision that felt like a weapon. "It's clean," he said. "It's not maybe, it's not arguable, and it's not interpretation. The lie literally cannot exist in real time. Back at my office, Keely brought in another piece like she'd been carrying it in her pocket all day. She shut my door, sat down, and said, "I saved a voicemail because it didn't feel right, and I didn't want to pretend it was nothing." She played it from her phone, and the number came up restricted like the caller thought that made him invisible. A man's voice filled my office, smooth and careful, like he'd practiced sounding reasonable while cornering people. He offered Keely protection if she cooperated with a compliance review, and every word was wrapped in polite pressure. Keely looked at me and said, "I don't know who that was, but it sounded like a guy who does this for a living." When Marin listened to it later, I heard it too. That same controlled confidence I'd felt in that text preview. Vance Marlowe didn't need to raise his voice because he didn't rely on volume. He relied on fear. Around that same time, Discovery coughed up an email chain where Blythe sounded less like a mastermind and more like someone trying not to drown, asking Vance if this ends the debt issue. It didn't excuse her, but it explained the pressure, and it made the whole thing uglier because she still chose to burn me to cover her own mess. Marin looked at me across her desk and said, "We have a choice here, Damon. We can keep defending every new fire, or we go on offense and force them to answer for the fraud." I didn't hesitate because if they were willing to fake documents, they were willing to destroy my business. "No more defending," I said, and I pushed the forged packet toward her like I was sliding her a target. "We end this." Marin didn't smile when I said we end this, and I liked her more for that. She slid the forged packet into a folder like she was putting away a weapon. Then she looked at me and spoke like a person who didn't believe in second chances. "If we go on offense, we do it with records, not rage," she said. And she started listing filings the way some people list groceries. Within days, she filed a motion accusing Blythe and Vance Marlowe of submitting falsified evidence, and she asked for sanctions, fees, and a referral for investigation. She didn't threaten anybody or hint around the edges, because threats were for people without proof. She documented every crack Oren had found and put it in a format the court couldn't ignore. We also filed a countersuit for defamation tied to the rumor campaign and the fake compliance packet that hit my bank and my client. That wasn't revenge for fun, and it wasn't about my ego needing a win. It was survival, because my business couldn't bleed every time Blythe decided to tell a new story. For the next 2 weeks, everything moved on paper before it moved in rooms. Subpoenas, sworn statements, reply filings, and the slow grind that turns a private mess into a public record. Oren delivered a sworn report that dismantled their story line by line, and he did it in the same flat, unbothered tone he used for everything else. He laid out mismatched timestamps, formatting anomalies, bank routing errors, and the impossible account timeline like it was basic math. When I skimmed it, I felt something close to relief, because it wasn't emotional language at all. It was the kind of detail that quietly kills lies. Depositions started, and I wasn't in the room for some of the moments, but Marin called me right after like she wanted the facts fresh. "She got cornered on who prepared the packet," Marin said, and I could hear paper shuffling in the background. "She tried to blame a template, like fraudulent evidence grows on trees." Marin paused, then added, "That answer played badly, because templates don't invent account dates." Vance tried the gentleman act when Oren was questioned, leaning on calm tone and polite phrasing like manners could cover fraud. Marin told me he said, "Mistakes happen, and no harm was intended," as if intention was the whole point. Oren didn't bite, and his response was so blunt it made me laugh once, sharp and ugly. "Intent is irrelevant," Oren said. "This is fabricated." Keely got pulled into it too, and I watched the stress hit her in real time, because she had bills and a life, and she hadn't asked to be a target. Blythe's side hinted Keely had access and motive, trying to smear her like she was some desperate thief. That backfired when Keely's phone records showed the bribery voicemail from the restricted number and the unanswered outreach attempts, and suddenly the motive story looked like what it was, a setup looking for a body. Breyer kept me disciplined through all of it, and she didn't let me chase the kind of win that only feels good for a day. "Make them answer to judges, bankers, and employers," she told me over dinner one night, tapping her fork against the plate. "Those are the rooms that matter, so you stay clean and let them get sloppy." Ridgeway almost collapsed anyway, because boards hate anything that smells like risk, even when the risk is fake. The CFO told me their board wanted to pause everything until the cloud cleared, and I could hear the frustration under his professionalism. I offered a simple solution instead of begging. A temporary escrow structure for billing, plus a written assurance from Marin and documentation from Oren, so they had coverage if anyone tried to drag them in. Ridgway agreed to continue, and that mattered because it cut off Blythe's leverage, since she wanted me desperate and broke. Then Marin confirmed the missing piece, and she delivered it without any flourish. Blythe had old personal debt tied to a prior employer, the kind of pressure that explained the secretive mail and the panic I'd been seeing for weeks. Nothing criminal proven yet, but enough that Vance could have used it as leverage. He had her on a hook, Marin said, and the moment that landed, Blythe requested a settlement conference fast, her tone suddenly urgent instead of confident. That request didn't end anything by itself, but it changed the temperature. The forged packet was already part of the record. Ridgway had stayed with me, and her side had stopped sounding certain. For the first time, she was reacting instead of driving the pace. I didn't gloat, and I didn't ask for mercy either. I told Marin one thing, clean and simple. Full withdrawal of claims, repayment of fees, no entitlement to my condo or my agency shares, and a written retraction to the parties they'd poisoned. Marin nodded once and started typing. Without looking up, she said, "We'll get it signed and then we move on with your life." I nodded once, because there was nothing left to argue about, and I walked out of her office with my hands empty. A few weeks later, the settlement papers got signed on a Thursday in late October, in a conference room that smelled like stale carpet and printer ink. Blythe sat across from me with the same polished face, but her eyes kept darting to Marin's signature lines like she was afraid they'd bite. When it was done, she walked out with no claim to my condo, no claim to my agency equity, and no spousal support. And she ate the fees tied to the false motions. That settlement closed the divorce fight, not the fallout from what they had filed. Marin separated the personal settlement from the fraud issues and kept pushing the separate fraud and defamation channels still available to us. Vance didn't go to jail by the time the papers were signed, and I stopped expecting a clean ending the minute I saw how slowly the system moved. Marin filed what she could, and within weeks I heard through industry contacts that he was under investigation for fraudulent consulting practices. Blythe's employer didn't keep her after the court record hit, and I noted the irony and kept walking. Back at the agency, I sent one factual email to Ridgway's board with Marin copied, and I kept every sentence tight. I attached Oren's report, summarized the court orders, and told them the only thing that mattered. The claims were baseless and documented. The contract stayed and my team stopped whispering. No drama, just facts, period. Keeley stayed on and I made it clear she wasn't taking the fall for anyone else's scheme. I gave her a raise, tightened our controls, and locked approvals down so nobody could move an invoice without a second set of eyes. Give me the overall score of this story. Length is not a problem. Let me know if there are any major inconsistencies, both general and chronological. Are there any repetitions, both literal and rewritten? Do all character roles remain logical and consistent throughout the entire story? Are there any parts that feel cut out or disconnected from the story? All amounts, dates, and numbers, including Roman numerals, must be written in words for AI voiceover. Is there any profanity, cliches, or use of the name Jesus? If yes, they will need to be corrected later. Check if there is any LGBTQ-related content, gay or lesbian. There must be none. Are there mentions of topics not allowed on YouTube, such as suicide or drugs? These must also be absent. How many questions about geolocation are asked to the audience in the story? List all such questions in the answer. Is there a concluding question at the end? At the end of each point, answer with yes or no. Answer in Russian, except text of the story. Story for analysis.